welcome Mr. Kamal Munir.
Well, thank you very much, Sidra, and thank you very much, Pakistan Banking Association, for inviting me today. Given that I'm probably the only person in this room, in this rather large room, who does not work for a bank or any financial institution, I'm still wondering why I'm here. The organizers obviously know something that I don't. But that is only one of the problems that I'm facing today. The other problem being that we first decided that I was going to speak on disruption in the banking industry. Then the title of the session changed to Economic Resilience of Pakistan, and I was told it would be good if you can say something on the economic resilience of Pakistan. So that is what I started thinking about. And now it's somewhere in the middle, the two. So it reminds me of the fact that there are millions of Pakistani kids who in school struggle with the subject of English language. Okay? And the hardest bit is writing essays in English. So often what you will find is they memorize a particular essay that they expect the examiner is going to ask. Right? And one such essay we used to hear from our parents used to be a morning walk. Write an essay on morning walk. So they would just memorize it, and as soon as they got it, they would just write it down. And one such kid went, having memorized this essay. Unfortunately, it wasn't his lucky day. And the essay that he was asked to write in the exam was a journey by airplane. So he was in a real, sort of dilemma and conundrum. And so he started his essay. He said, once I had the occasion to travel by airplane, as soon as the airplane got into the air, I looked down and I saw a person taking a morning walk, right? And after that, it was all morning walk, right? And that is the strategy that I am going to also use today. I'm going to start by I'm going to start by talking about resilience and then pivot to disruption. Okay? Hopefully, the pivot will be relatively seamless, right? But most importantly, I also realize that I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch. Okay? So I will also try to keep it short. Okay? It'll be an essay on morning walk, but a short essay. Okay? It'll be a short walk today. Okay? Now, when we talk about economic resilience, what do we actually mean by economic resilience? Economic resilience is not just about surviving, which sometimes in conversations in Pakistan, sort of tends to come across, that we are a very resilient nation because we keep stumbling on. Economic resilience is actually about capacity development. It's about organizing, and it is about talent, developing talent. I don't know many things, certainly not many about banking, but one thing that I do know something about is producing talent, because that's what we do in the university. You saw some of our talent on display today in earlier presentations, right, that came out of Cambridge. But this, by the way, is a picture you can probably see. This is not Gaza. This is post-Second World War Germany. This is Dresden. Right? And it looked pretty much like Gaza, right, at that time. Right? And the only reason they were able to rebuild is not because of the Marshall Plan. They got about 11% of the total Marshall Plan, which was about 13 billion at the time. Right? It was about because the wealth, as FDR said, the wealth of a nation lies not in its natural resources, but in the minds of its people. It had a lot of well-trained and well-organized people who were able to rebuild the entire country. Okay? So if we want to be resilient as a nation, and we want to go somewhere, then that is where you start. You start by producing that talent. And because that is the real capability and asset of a particular country. If there is a country that relies on a natural resource, the day its natural resource finishes, it will go back to olden times. The thing to do is to embody your people with that training. But how do you produce talent? Asim was just showing us some graphs of where we are and where we have been in terms of education, right? Secondary education in Pakistan. Right? But by opening more universities, for example, in Pakistan, which is, something that we have been doing, we even converted a lot of colleges into universities and so on. Have we been able to produce more talent? What produces talent is not just degrees that will award, universities that will award more degrees, and then counting how many PhDs we produced last year and so on. That is not going to make much of a difference. Talent is produced when we solve hard problems as a nation. Some of you might recognize the picture on top is the first integrated circuit that was produced in 1961 by Noyce and Kilby, and who later on created the firm Fairchild Semiconductor, and which became sort of one of the key nodes in the whole ecosystem. At that time, it was about 50 times more expensive than the other component that was available at that time, which was made by putting wires together and different components together. The big advantage here was that it was scalable. You could keep putting more and more transistors, components on the same little bit of silicon. But where's the market? And that market only emerged because the United States was trying to solve those hard problems. Okay? And at that time, Tansri Azman mentioned the Sputnik moment. And America did not want to lag behind in the space race. And they decided they were going to launch an Apollo program. They were also trying to build ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and so on and so forth. So the weight and the technology itself were critical at that time. And the market was created by the US government and the Department of Defense that time. And that led to the creation of these firms. And in 1 year, Fairchild Semiconductor's sales went from a few thousand to $500,000, which is not very much, $500,000, right, in a year. But 500,000 made out of selling integrated circuits that are leading the world is much more valuable than $5 billion that comes from just retailing or something like that, which does not push the technological boundaries of the country. So these investments that were made at that time were with a view to creating and to pushing the technological boundaries of the nation. The picture below is of the university that Tansri Azman mentioned, that he has been to several times. Not many people outside China know about it. It's Zhejiang University in Huangzhou. DeepSeek, that you have all heard of, the new AI model that China produced using much cheaper GPUs because a ban was put on them. They could not import the latest GPUs from NVIDIA anymore, which goes beyond ChatGPT and other models and much, much more cheaply, came out of this university. Alibaba came out of this university. The university has a reputation for spinning out tech companies. It started off with a vision of being the Stanford of China. I think it has gone beyond that now. The number of papers that come out of Zhejiang University, otherwise known as Zeda in China, is greater than any other university in the whole world. The number of those papers that are counted in the top 10% papers of their disciplines is second only to one university, Harvard. So they don't measure the success by counting how many PhDs they have produced. They count how many companies have they spun out of this. Universities are not seen just as a place where people will go in and come out with a degree. They are seen as innovation ecosystems. They can tell you, my Chinese friends can tell you exactly which university to go to for what thing. So for example, if we ask, which university do we turn to if we need expertise in AI? They will send you right here. Jiang, who created DeepSeek, basically studied artificial intelligence at Zhejiang. Are we creating universities here for awarding degrees or being innovation ecosystems? Who is this talent that we want to produce for? I'm staggered. I'm literally staggered. When we have education ministers visiting Cambridge and asking us, what are the needs of industry in the West? Because we want to produce such people and then export them. I'm staggered when I hear that, because countries that are going somewhere produce talent not for others, but for themselves. Because that talent is necessary for their development plans. And where is the role of the state in this? The role of the state, obviously, is to have a brilliant public education system here. When I look at universities like LUMS, perhaps considered to be one of the finest universities in Pakistan, and I look at their MBA program, rather than growing, I see it has stayed pretty much at the same level of enrollment. Because they struggle to find good talent to come into the MBA program from Pakistan, a country of 250 million people. They have an MBA program of MBA class of less than 100, which doesn't compute. And then the job of the state here is to create and support national champions. One of the most competitive industries here is actually banking. Banking has done very well in Pakistan. Banking has control of most of its domestic market. Banking has produced a lot of talent. You go outside Pakistan and you see a lot of Pakistani talent doing extremely well in foreign banks, and vice versa. Then many of those people come in. So there is a process of osmosis that is taking place here. A number of people sitting here have worked in the finest leading banks in the world, and they have come back and to work in Pakistan. So there is talent. There is a domestic market. How do we take it to the next level of global competitiveness? Zafar mentioned that in his opening remarks. The finance minister mentioned that he wants every industry to be contributing to exports. I don't think every industry will be able to, not every, because in order to be contributing meaningfully to exports, you need to be globally competitive. And there has to be some competitive advantage why people will buy your services, your products, rather than somebody else's, right? But this is certainly one industry that can. create that global competitiveness. These are all national champions, the pictures that you see there. And the important thing here is to align organizational and national goals. They used to say, what is good for General Motors is good for America. Because when General Motors did well, when it was the largest corporation in America, it produced jobs. It brought income to America. And now, things have moved on. That is the process of Schumpeterian creative destruction. Some industries will do better, some will sort of do better in the future. Now what is good for Apple or NVIDIA is good for America, and America completely realizes that. You've heard statements from Donald Trump recently where he's telling the Europeans that you have not been fair to our companies. Why? Because you have brought all kinds of regulatory hassle. And yes, a lot of the charges for anti-competitive behavior against companies like Google and Apple, they have been levied in Europe rather than in America. They have been fully supportive of their companies. And now they are putting pressure on other countries to also give them an easier ride. Some countries realize that one way, no names, but this was mentioned in the morning, that one way of aligning goals is by taxing success. That is one way, but it is not the best way. The best way is to develop that industry further, to take them to the next level of competitiveness and competitive behavior, rather than starting to tax them with no view to future development. And that is extremely important. Okay? Because any kind of policy that we want to make here, that we want to come up with here, has to be with a view towards the future. This is what countries do. This is what we do in the UK, for example. We have think tanks, we have sort of lots of universities, which are basically looking at how will this industry change? What are the new challenges? In 10 years' time, in order to be successful, what capabilities and assets are we going to use? And that is what they start producing. China is not just sort of leading the world in terms of LLM models or in terms of electric vehicles. It is now also beginning to take market share away in big pharma, an industry that the US dominated for decades. And Chinese companies now have developed a competitive advantage. They do much faster trials and much cheaper. And they are licensing their technology and their drugs in the US, and FDA is giving them those approvals within a matter of months for those drugs. So, when we develop policies, when we want to think about economic resilience, like Tansri and Salman, here is another alumnus of Cambridge, a few years before them, at the university. And what he said was very interesting, because he said it is not the strongest species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change. And that is something that I want to talk a little bit more about, because we have focused a lot on economic challenges, and we have focused a lot on the immediate challenges that we have, but there is a bigger challenge that we haven't talked so much about, although it has been mentioned in some of the earlier presentations. And that is the very industry that is present in this room is getting disrupted. It is going to see a sea change. 10 years' time, the people sitting in this room will be very different. The talent sitting in this room will be very different. Why? because of the, you can call it encroachment or you can call it anything else, of technology into this field. Okay? And this is a challenge that is being faced all over the world. Okay? You always compete for the future. Okay? The graph that I have, the rather simple graph that I have, shows you one thing. The world is moving towards, and this was mentioned earlier, platformization. The biggest companies of our time, the Googles, the Metas, Apple, and so on, they're all platform companies. What is different? That is what this simple graph shows you. On the x-axis, we have market share. And on the y-axis, we have value of your service or your product to the consumer. For a conventional product, the value does not go up with market share. Take restaurants, take cars for the past several decades. Even if Nissan or Honda sold, had 50% market share, the value of buying a Honda to me does not go up because of those numbers. Industries which are characterized by network effects, it is market share that creates value. When you open an account on social media or on some social media platform, you don't compare the features of different platforms. You go where your friends are, where most people are. When you decide to use Outlook for your email, you don't compare the features of different emailing software that you have. You go where everyone else is. So what you see is the value goes up exponentially. And my submission to you is, in the coming years, an increasing number of industries are going to be characterized by network effects. You see the picture below. This one car is owned by Google, the small one, and the bigger one is owned by or manufactured by Sony. What are these two companies doing in the auto industry? The big incumbents were the Hondas, the Toyotas, the BMWs, the Audis, and so on and so forth. What I am also, so I am the Mr. Foresight here, Salman. I'm, the guy who got locked up. So I can, again, I will speculate, and this is all that is, speculation, that in the next 10 years, the people who will be dominating this industry are not going to be BMW, Honda, Toyota, or any of the names that we have grown up with. It'll be the likes of Google, and other big companies, maybe Apple, or Amazon, or you name it. They have never made a car in their lives. And they will be dominating because the ecosystem is changing. And just like the ecosystem in financial services is changing slowly. But disruption is easy to miss in its initial stages because it starts with the low end. Sorry, I'll just back. It starts with the low, unattractive end of the market. Bits of business that powerful incumbents are not very reluctant to give away. But that's the thin end of the wedge. And then they start expanding. And that is what we see in a number of, let me see if I have that slide. Yeah, so this is, the first time I noticed this was when I was, sort of talking to Kodak, and this was early 2000s. And I noticed that the industries that are getting disrupted are often the last ones to recognize that there is disruption taking place. I wrote something in the Financial Times, I remember in 2006 or 7, basically saying that Kodak has no chance now. They had just come out with a new strategy and putting another $5 billion in investment into new products and so on and so forth. And I knew the management of Kodak at that time. I had visited their headquarters in Rochester several times, and they said to me, it's interesting how outsiders view our business, which was a polite way of saying, you have no idea what you're talking about. We are the ones who know this industry. And they had grown up. But that is precisely the problem, because they knew the industry too well. And they were too close. So that is point number 3 here. Our core capabilities, which underpin our success, become our core rigidities, the very things that prevent us from changing. Because we make money in a particular way, and we become reluctant to shift away from that. And the other thing is, the companies that get disrupted are not the companies that lack resources and technology, but lack imagination. They refuse to believe that in future, the world could, sort of get by perfectly without them. So they often start by putting themselves in the middle and then imagining a world around them, rather than imagining what will this ecosystem look like, how will financial transactions sort of take place today. So it's about mindset, shift in mindset and in talent. Right? And you're not often replaced. I mean, often companies think, who can replace us? We are the ones who do this the best, and so on. Think about iTunes. When Apple launched iTunes, right? What did it do to the music industry that was basically facing annihilation from piracy? Because music had become digitized, people were just sharing music for free. iTunes, 80% of the legally downloaded music in the world was coming from iTunes. So Apple saved them, right? The music companies, because they had lost their revenue stream. They hated Apple. Because while Apple knew nothing about music, they essentially became an intermediary. And what was Apple's strength? They owned the customers. So now we are seeing a lot of platforms coming into the financial ecosystem who own customers, the customer interface, and that is where the power lies. Every year, Google pays about $12 billion to Apple. They write a check for $12 billion and give it to Apple. What does Apple sell them for $12 billion a year? Access to its customer base. So just like music, in finance, banks could, if not get replaced, although the value chain, I think, is going to be fragmented. Different people are already coming into, you see different companies coming into the payment space, and you have debt markets now, and private equity firms, other players, they're going straight, and they're beginning to lend straight away, and so forth. So disruption is afoot, right? And when I see this, right, when I ask my students who are working around European countries and in America, said, how do you choose a bank now? Says the key vote is that of the CTO. No. And every single time they vote for the tech company. So there are significant changes that we also need to, if we want to, because as I said, I think we have a very competitive industry here. How do we take it to the next level? How do we develop the talent that we will need in 5 years, 10 years' time here? So when we think about resilience, right, those are the questions that we need to be thinking about. So I will just stop here. Thank you very much.